For my project, I decided to focus on the ceremonies of the ancient Incan people, and the first ritual that they had was the most important, which was the Festival of the Sun, and it was usually held in June, and it was believed that the sun held the ceremony and that the noblemen were just the guests. They would come dressed in their best clothes, and the emperor of the village came too, and it was the sun god, which is the most important god to the people. They do worship many other gods, but the sun god helps. They believe that it brought warmth and happiness to all the people, and they usually took place in the plazas of the village, and it lasted for 9 days, and the people were colorfully dressed, and there was a lot of dancing. They also did animal sacrifices, which was believed to help with the season's crops. And in about 1530, the Spanish conquest put an end to this ceremony because it was said that it was a pagan dance against Christ. As I said, that they do worship many other gods, and they worship the gods in sacred places, which included caves and mountaintops, rivers, lakes, battlefields, and certain areas of the plaza. And when they passed one of these sacred places, they would throw a few leaves down. And if they didn't have a leaf, they would place a stone in that place. And if they didn't have any stones, then a man would pull a hair from his body as the offering. And they usually had some kind of shelter nearby where a priest or priestess would look after the sacred place and maintain it. They would cultivate the field in that area. They also worshiped the stars, and they believed that the God of all gave the stars a specific order to carry out. For their sacrificing, they mainly sacrificed teenagers and children. And they made these sacrifices to help with crops, to stop pandemics, to mark the death of royalty, or after a natural disaster. And when they were going to sacrifice one of the teenagers or the children, they would find the ones that were most attractive and physically appealing, and then they would fatten them up with high-protein diets. But when it came to sacrificing an adult, it kind of changed a little bit. They would do a ritual combat, and then the loser would be the one who was sacrificed. In the events leading up, it would kind of start with the two males, and they would fight to remove each other's headdress. And then the loser would be stripped and led to the priest or priestess, where they were then sacrificed. And they kind of used multiple ways to kill the person, which was then turned into a ceremony where they bled to death to feed the gods, and some of the other ones was removing of the heart. They removed the entrails, they crushed to death with rocks, beheaded, drowned, starvation, and sun soaking. At one point in time, they actually found a mass casualty grave, and it had over 42 sacrificed bodies in it. The next ceremony that they had was the Festival of the Dead, and it was believed that if they didn't pay respect to their dead ancestors, then the ancestor would come back to haunt them. During this festival, anyone who was of non-noble blood had to leave the city. Drums were played for this ceremony, and that was it. They had a drum show, which we call a parade, and during this, the adolescent males would dress in red tunics, and they would dance and play the drums in the city square. It lasted many hours, and no one was to speak. They would also do human and animal sacrifices during this if the gods did not seem pleased with the ceremony. The men, though, they fasted a week prior to this ceremony so that their body would be cleansed and so that the dead would be closer to them. But actually, most of the festivals required that the men fast in the coming weeks. During the month of April, I consider this kind of one of the most oddest festivals, and it was the festival of the dance of the young maize, which was to help with the corn crop. But during this festival, they would take an all-white llama and groom it, dress and brush it, and then they would dress it up in fine clothing and ornaments and parade it around the village. And anyone who was of non-noble blood had to bow at the presence of this llama. The night of the festival, though, the llama was led up to their sacrificial altar and was bled out. From there, the festival continued with the feast and the drum playing, singing, and dancing. For their wedding ceremonies, most of the Incan cultures had arranged marriages, and most of the girls were married out by the time they were 16. If you were of non-noble blood, you could only have one wife, but if you were noble, you could have more than one wife. And if a man held interest in a woman, he could not go and openly meet her. He just had to show interest. And if he met her in passing and he showed interest and she showed interest, then they could make an arrangement with the city councils, and that way they could arrange a marriage. Once a year, the city council would meet and they would line up the boys and girls and they would decide who was going to marry who. If a girl had more than one interest, then the governor would meet with both of the parents and decide who got to marry the girl. When everything was approved, the ceremony started with the boy's family meeting the girl's family, and he would present her with a pair of sandals and he would place them on her feet, which is today like our engagement rings. And that symbolized the commitment that he was going to serve her for the rest of his life. Once that was complete, then the girl's family would go to the boy's family, and she would present her husband with a pin for his cape, a wool shirt, and a headdress. And then the village elder would speak on the newlyweds' marriage, and a feast would follow. And then after the feast, the couple would move into a new house, which was built by the male's family. I kind of was hoping that I could find more on the deaths and the birth ceremonies that they had, but I couldn't really find anything, so I just kind of focused more on all the festivals that they had.